I would like to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. P. Sufenas Virius Lupus, sometimes known as PSVL, who is a metagender person and has been practicing polytheism since 1992. He primarily practices a queer Greco-Roman Egyptian syncretist reconstructionist polytheist devotion dedicated to Antinous, the deified lover of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, and related deities and divine figures, and was one of the founders of modern organized Antinoan devotion in 2002. He is also a practicing Celtic reconstructionist polytheist with regular devotional connections to many other deities from a variety of cultures and practices. He holds a PhD in Celtic civilizations, has published 8 books on polytheist matters, and has an extensive record of articles, poetry, and fiction, as well in relation to polytheism across many anthologies and periodicals. And I would also mention that I especially appreciate your participation, given that yesterday and today are significant days, I'm led to understand, in your own ritual calendar. And so that makes your active participation both yesterday and today all the more meaningful to me and valued by me. We've been friends for some time, and I'm very pleased to have your participation. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, right into it then. I would like to begin with thanks first to Dr. Edward Butler, the Center for Global Polytheist and Indigenous Traditions, Hari Kiran Vadlamani, and the Indic Academy, and all those who have been involved in making this conference possible, both organizationally and operationally. Second, to all of you who are attending and have contributed so much to the success of this effort, whether in presenting or in listening and providing essential feedback and discussion on what you have heard. And third, but most importantly, to the deities, ancestors, and spirits who have not only inspired the present work and the work of all of you who are attending this conference, but in my own case, who have made my life possible at all, chief among them being Antinous and Thetis. I present my paper to you today from an area of the state of Washington on part of an island in the Salish Sea that was an intertribal gathering place during the summer seasons for the Upper Skagit, Samish, Swinomish, Klallam, Lummi, Tulalip, Snoqualmie, and other Coast Salish peoples, whose descendants continue to protect these lands and the spirits of the land in and on them in the traditions of their ancestors. Thankfully or otherwise, it is certainly not every day that one finds a deity or deities who task one with refounding their entire ancient cultus with little more than their names to go on. A situation very similar to this, technology problems here. A situation very similar to this was what faced me one afternoon in late June of 2002, not long after I had returned to Cork in the Republic of Ireland after a short time in the United States at the end of an academic year during my doctoral education. With the prospect of a dissertation ahead of me on Celtic dogs, wolves, werewolves, and dogheads, itself divinely inspired by the Irish hero Cuchulainn 7 years before, that would end up being 160,000 words and which would take just under 4 more years to complete, I had more than enough to do, since I had only written some introductory pieces to it thus far at that stage. This call to refound a cultus, that of Antinous, was a literal answer to my prayers, as I had grown disillusioned with polytheist practice when I saw what a dearth of it there was in Ireland, after having dealt with watered-down pseudo-Celtic paganism for over a decade in the United States. I had asked the wider cosmos of divine beings for a practice that was legitimately and demonstrably ancient in origin, yet not something so firmly established that it could not undergo adaptations to the tempus and locus of the early 21st century, nor something, as Celtic paganism had become, that was so familiar and yet so misunderstood and mischaracterized as to meet immediate resistance from anyone whose Wiccan-flavored take on it might be offended when confronted with conflicting ideas. Further, I had hoped it would be open to syncretism, which I maintain is the default position of pluralistic polytheism and not the anomaly or quote unquote unfortunate accretion in a diminished state that monotheist scholarship on religion characterizes it as, and that it would not only have a place for a diversity of gender identities and sexual orientations, but that it would in some sense be deeply involved in and have important relevance for these aspects of human existence and flourishing. I received all of those things exactly and in spades with the cultus of Antinous, the deified lover of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, and the intercultural Greco-Roman Egyptian supersyncretistic nature of his ancient devotion, which not only enthralled the everyday devotees of the late antique pan-Mediterranean world, but garnered the ire of the Christians, who have more anti-Antinous statements preserved in their extant writings than there are Antinoan devotional literary relics still available. And yet, if one were to ask me today what the most challenging aspects of my time in Ireland was, it was not doing that dissertation, though that wasn't easy, nor the dissertation level of detailed academic research for which I was receiving neither guidance nor credit on the remnants of the ancient cultus of Antinous. It was the question which remains just as relevant to my life now, nearly 20 years later, as it loomed both hopefully and menacingly then. Namely, how does one breathe new life into a practice that had been not only sundered and silenced, but which had been an especial target of shame and scorn on the part of the hegemonizing monotheist supremacy, which attempted, but in certain ways utterly failed, to destroy? I will have more to say on that topic toward the end of the present discussion, but in consultation with Antinous and other deities, their preference was to focus in my excursus today on the what of his ancient cultus and its transformation into modern practice, rather than the how of its quotidian engagement. I hope that my sharing of these matters will be of inspiration and some degree of guidance to those who are engaging in this important work of restoration, no matter which tradition or cultus is involved, since we are all the victims of a common serial aggressor in this regard. General guidance on cultic refoundation is probably not something which can be generalized, alas. And so the contextualized approach has been deemed better for the present circumstances. I begin with the cultus of Antinous's most prominent and famed strength, which is also one of its greatest obstacles in terms of its larger understanding amongst modern scholars, as well as many of its late antique detractors, both Christian and polytheist. The fact is, after the Emperor Augustus in first place, the Emperor Hadrian in second place, and given Hadrian's importance for Antinous cultus, this is quite apt, Antinous is third in terms of the largest number of surviving images from his ancient cultus in all of the span of Greco-Roman history, with well over 100, and these show him to be what he was most certainly in his human existence, a young, very attractive, and distinctive man. There was such a proliferation of them that Johann Joachim Winckelmann, an 18th century German scholar who is considered the founder of the discipline of art history in the Western world, owed a great deal of his interest in and its success with that discipline to his devoted study of several Antinous images that were in the collection of his patron, the Italian Catholic Cardinal Alessandro Albani, himself rumored to have restarted several secret polytheistic cults, including one to Antinous at his private villa. Ancient detractors, both polytheist and Christian, said Antinous was a mere pretty face that had enthralled the Emperor Hadrian, and that he was made divine for no other reason than this. But of course, the reality is far more interesting and complex. Yet this shallow evaluation has held sway in too many circles. Antinous, as a result of this, has had a highly visible profile in certain sections of academia and culture for the past 300 years, and yet he is treated more as an art historical subject an historical curiosity, an occasional archaeological treasure, and a site for theorizing on ancient conceptions of sexuality, but rarely what he actually was and why so many of his images existed and survived destruction, which is that he was a figure of religious devotion, and his placement in that context is most often ignored and certainly downplayed down to the present. Understanding the proliferation of his images, often in the aspects of any number of Egyptian, Greek, or Roman, as well as other deities, as expressions of both public and private devotion, rather than as mere decorations for one's villa, as they often became in later centuries, was one of the first steps in understanding the nature of his cultus and its exemplary syncretistic modus operandi. Hunting down and learning as much as possible about Antinous, and thus also about Hadrian and various other individuals connected to the well-traveled and polytheistically pious emperor, was the next step, and gathering all that had been written about him in the ancient world, whether slander by church fathers or praise by polytheist poets, on papyrus scraps or inscribed on stone for altars and temple pediments, was the major task that I largely carried out between long trips to the university libraries in Cork, Dublin, Edinburgh, and the British Library in London between 2002 and 2006. The results of this work are largely available in my book Devotio Antinuo, The Doctor's Notes, Volume 1, published in 2011. Unfortunately, with many of these specifically devotional texts, we only have tantalizing fragments, and often frustratingly so, when pieces of information we would greatly wish to know are begun, but then the essential lines are obliterated. In this regard, we do have one complete text and another fragmentary one, which mutually confirm an important aspect of practice that has been used in the modern revival of Antinous' cultus, which is the matter of the timing of sacred festivals, as Dr. Butler already mentioned. As I give this paper on October 29th of 2021, I note that we are in the holiest period of the year for Antinoan devotion, which is the sacred nights of Antinous, lasting 9 days and nights from October 24th through November 1st, encompassing its climactic culmination on Foundation Day, which is October 30th annually, and was the exact historical date on which the cultus was founded as a result of the finding of Antinous' body after he had drowned in the River Nile, a tragic death which nonetheless conferred immediate apotheosis on those who underwent it, at the spot where Hadrian then founded his holy city of Antinopolis on the eastern bank of the Nile across from Hermopolis Magna. And I'll just note here informally, it's very rare that we have any polytheistic cultus where we know the time, the place, and so many details, many people who were there when it started, when it began. So this is kind of, doesn't make it entirely unique, but it makes it fairly uncommon, distinct. Anyway, this date is noted on a fragmentary cult calendar found amongst the Oxyrhynchus papyri, and exactly 4 weeks later, on November 27th, the natal festival of Antinous is also noted. The natal festival, with the exact same date, is also noted on the constitution of a collegium dedicated to Antinous and the Roman goddess Diana in Lanuvium, not far from Rome, near Aricia and Lake Nemi, the mirror of Diana, where the practices of Diana's cult were so essential to Sir James George Fraser's formulations on sacred kingship in the Golden Bough. These two festivals, Foundation Day on October 30th and the birth of Antinous on November 27th, are the two most important festivals of our ritual year and anchor all else within it. What both cult calendars indicated was that other festivals throughout the year were particular to each location and its members, and could include devotions to any number of deities, as well as the birth dates of prominent members of the cultus and other such events. While we know that in the case of the Lanuvium Collegium, which had been formed as a burial club for its members, Their primary activity on festival days was a feast involving a certain set number of servings of bread and bonum vinum, good wine, provided by the president of the club. The activities on the Egyptian cult calendar, however, are not as clear due to the papyrus text deterioration. On the birthday of Antinous' date, horse rites are indicated, but what those might have been is not remotely clear. Horses, however, do figure frequently in the Egyptian coinage of Antinous, and likewise in his Greek coinage from Arcadia, where his family originated. Arcadia, in addition to being the location most associated with werewolves and wolf cults in the Greek world, had particular traditions in relation to the divine horse Arion, the offspring of the grain goddess Demeter and the sea and horse god Poseidon, along with Despoina, as we heard in Stephanos' paper yesterday. In this instance, we see that even coin images related to a deity can provide insight into the complex of mythic narratives and potential cultic practices associated with them. And thus, even images that are literal currency can be units of worth where religious devotion is concerned. Perhaps the most tantalizing known unknown in the case of Antinous' cultic remains is the poem on the lion hunt of Hadrian and Antinous, the only historic, as it were, event we know which occurred in their lives together, and yet which was subject to an epic mythic treatment as soon as it occurred. In brief, a human-eating lion became quite famous in the deserts west of Alexandria in the years before Hadrian and Antinous came to visit Egypt in 130 CE. And Hadrian, known to be an avid hunter, decided to seek the beast. In encountering the lion, Antinous wounded but did not slay the great cat and was in danger of being killed by it, but was saved at the last moment by Hadrian. In the aftermath, so the etiological portion of the myth goes, the blood of the lion flowed into the Nile and became the red Nile lotus that was later named for Antinous, and wreaths of which were the victor's crown at his regular memorial athletic games, which lasted well after the dominance of Christianity in the Mediterranean, at least to the 6th century in parts of Egypt. It is known that Pancrates, or Pancrates of Heliopolis, whose names in Egyptian and Greek respectively mean divine child and all-powerful, an Egyptian poet, priest, magician who is deeply associated with the first literary occurrence of the folkloric motif of the sorcerer's apprentice, which in certain publications I have argued has an added significance as more than mere folklore when considered in an Antinoan and satiric context relevant to its author, Lucian of Samosata's own particular interests, is said by Athenaeus of Naucratis to have written an epic poem on this lion hunt, and a short excerpt from it is given by him in the Dipnosophistae. Other fragmentary papyri that detail some of the motifs and episodes relevant to this have also been found, so that one of the most important myths of the Antinoan cultus can easily be identified and upon which it can be expanded and expounded. However, we do not have the complete epic, nor any complete composition treating this topic, and probably never will. We know that other great writers of Hadrian's time, like Mesomedes of Crete, several of whose hymns with musical notation have survived, and Numenios of Heraclea Pontica, a prose writer, also treated Antinous in known and once famed writings, and yet we cannot now access their actual works. These losses are lamentable, and yet they cannot stand as obstacles preventing engagement in actual cultus, and this matter is the one to which I would like to turn for the remainder of this discussion. Where the words of the ancient poets have been lost and their hymns are no longer heard, modern poets working in their own languages as well as in ancient ones must step into the breach and sing their own songs of the deities. For while our exemplars' works may be inaccessible to us, the source of their inspiration in Antinous and the many other deities remain as vivid and accessible as ever. I have written a great deal of such poetry, available in a number of my published works, and am currently working to finish a collection of eritological hymns encompassing roughly 500 such individual pieces that has taken me 6 years to work on, which I hope to have out sometime next year, Antinous and other deities willing. The recitation of these on festival days, however, has been the basis of my practice for the last 5 years, and it has been most effective and deeply transformative. Singing other hymns, including one that I sometimes refer to as the Frankensteinian hymn to Antinous, which I cobbled together from fragmentary lines from 2 ancient inscriptions and 1 papyrus piece, plus a few linking phrases I wrote in Koine Greek myself, have also become a regular part of my practice. In this regard of developing manners of daily devotion, I must give particular credit to the Hindu god Hanuman, who is deeply connected with many things, but among them, perhaps most prominently, is the entire path of devotion and exemplary bhakti. Indeed, anything worthwhile I have learned about devotion, I have learned at the feet of Hanuman, even as he kneels in prostration at the feet of Lord Ram. While the Western world has generally translated and understood bhakti as devotion, I would suggest, in what I have come to understand both linguistically and culturally, an even more essential element of the concept is participation, not only of the deities in the existence of their devotees, but of ourselves in the immortal existence of our deities. In the methodology of Reconstructionism, which many modern Western polytheists have adopted, manners of filling in the gaps are sought in a wide variety of ways. And a common one, sometimes even instigated and orchestrated by the deities themselves, is to observe and learn from the practices of uninterrupted cultures of polytheism. Whether these are indigenous techniques of spirit work, the formidable edifices of multidimensional religious practice exemplified in Hinduism's manifold traditions, or the praxis-focused ceremonies of Shinto, amongst many other possibilities. I must make particular note not only of Hinduism in terms of what I've been able to learn and usefully apply from it, but of Shinto and the ways in which it is celebrated at the Tsubaki Grand Shrine of America by the shrine's Guji or high priest, Reverend Lawrence Koichi Barish, as one of the instances of an indigenous polytheist religion practiced in the diaspora, where I've been attending ceremonies and have had many conversations for the past 14 years. As minority religious communities in the US, but with a shared theistic orientation, as so wisely explained by our friend, colleague, and co-religionist Theanos Thrax yesterday, and with the super syncretistic methods of the Antinoan cultus in mind in particular, I believe it behooves us to support and learn from the religions that are our pluralistic colleagues, and which have an active and uninterrupted religious regard for many deities and divine beings, as both Shinto and Hinduism do. Ours are religions of practice and experience, not mere belief in assent to creedal formulae. And as Reverend Barish says, one can read a description of all the ingredients in a sandwich, but that does not tell one how it tastes, nor does it nourish one without eating it. At the end of the hours of study, one must put one's heart in the offering tray, fill one's mind and throat with hymns of praise and wisdom, and bring the fruits of one's life onto the mat of devotional work before the shrine one has built, however humble, to the deities who have captured one's being. Unfortunately, the topic of developing a regular practice of divination to maintain regular contact with deities and receive their guidance amidst this work and life generally, and receipt of theophanic dreams and visions for inspirational and devotional direction is one too large to do more than acknowledging its utter necessity in the present discussion's context. What too many Reconstructionist methodology employing polytheists forget, but which is so obvious that it never has to be mentioned to practitioners of the polytheistic religions which have continued without interruption, is that one's religion should not only be a subject of study, but should be a method for living and engaging with the realities of divine personhood, realms, and phenomena. While a lively debate could ensue about the necessity or lack thereof for blood sacrifice in this realm of religious practices, I suspect there is a broad agreement amongst the present audience that the one blood, which cannot be an exception to this need, and which likewise need not be poured out so much as enlivened and revivified in the refounding of our polytheistic religions, is the blood that runs in our own arteries. That blood, enlivened by breath in our inspiration between lines of pious poetic praise and prayer, circulated with the sweat of the work we put in through research as well as devotional acts and ritual, and enriched with the nutrients of daily virtuous conduct in knowledge of the omnipresence of our divine providers, is our ever-living offering that must be reciprocally circulated regularly amidst all of the difficulties of existing in our current world and in the face of the trials which are yet to come within it. Antinous said in a dream during the early years of my devotion to him, a phrase which is a common acclamation in our prayers and hymns to this day, and which applies to any polytheistic cultus's practice as much as his. Haec estunde vita venit. This is where life comes from. No matter what and who the this happens to be for you, if all of your work is founded in such a place, a force, and a manner of being, then nothing but benefit to yourself and your communities will follow. Thank you very much.
Eloquently put, as always.